Hi everyone, my name is Arthur Reyes, and today I'm going to be talking about ReactJS. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with web development, React is basically just a front-end JavaScript library to help build user interfaces. So some people may refer to it as a framework, but it's really just a library. It makes it a lot easier to create responsive web pages, and it was developed by Facebook. So of course Facebook uses it, Instagram, Netflix, Reddit, and a bunch of other sites use it. So there's probably only a handful of you that are probably interested in web development, but I feel like knowing the basic fundamentals of why React is used by so many companies could be beneficial. I'm sure you guys use at least one site that uses React, and this presentation could give you some insight in what's happening when you interact with a website. So when we talk about React, we have to talk about components. They're basically the fundamental building block of React. They help you split up the UI into independent reusable pieces, and then you can think about each of those pieces in isolation. Conceptually, they're basically just JavaScript functions. They accept arbitrary inputs called props, and they return React elements that describe what should appear on the page. So let's take this shopping cart for example. The cart itself could be a component that has other components within it. So as you can see here, the cart list is basically just a list of a bunch of cart item components. And we said that these components can be reusable, which is evident here with the button component. Each button has their own ID, and then they can do different things. It really just helps keep things organized. So I mentioned that components take inputs called props, and these props are passed from the parent component. React says they should be immutable or pure, basically meaning that they're read-only and they should never be modified. Overall, React is pretty flexible, but they really try to have you stick to this one strict rule, which is all React components must act like pure functions with respect to their props. So this first picture right over here is an example of a pure function. It takes in two props, A and B, and returns the sum of those two numbers. So basically nothing there is modified. And in the second picture, something that we're a lot more familiar with. This is an example of a non-pure function where we accept a variable as an input and modify it by decrementing it. So this is what shouldn't be done using React. But the thing is, application UIs are dynamic and they change over time. So since we can't modify the props, this is where the concept of states come in. So let's take like Reddit for example. When you upload a post, you're basically changing the state of the variable that this number right here is associated with. Or if we go to like React's website, then in the search box, every time you type in a character, we're kind of changing the state of the search box. So with every like input that I'm doing, it suggests different things and it can more accurately predict what you're trying to search for. So one of the cool things about React is the use of a virtual DOM. So the real DOM is basically just the structure of the web page, and we can see here that it's basically a tree-like structure with all the elements here. DOM manipulation is kind of the heart of modern interactive web, but unfortunately it's a lot slower than most JavaScript operations, and the slowness is made worse by the fact that most JavaScript frameworks update the DOM much more than they have to. So as an example, let's say that we have a list that contains 10 items. We check off the first item, but most JavaScript frameworks would rebuild the entire list, so that's 10 times more work than necessary. So we only change one item, but the remaining 9 get rebuilt the exact same way. So to address this inefficiency, React popularized the virtual DOM for more efficient re-rendering of the actual DOM. The virtual DOM is just a lightweight copy of the real DOM. So React aims to re-render the virtual tree only when the state changes. So once a virtual DOM is updated, React compares the virtual DOM with a virtual DOM snapshot of what happened before the change, and then it compares those objects and sees which one has changed, and then it only updates those objects into the real DOM. So a virtual DOM object has the same properties as the real DOM object, but it lacks the real thing's power to directly change what's on the screen. So manipulating the DOM is really slow, but manipulating the virtual DOM is much faster because nothing gets drawn on screen. So basically think of manipulating the virtual DOM as editing a blueprint as opposed to moving rooms in an actual house. And then if we go back to that list example, once we check off an item on the list, we don't have to rebuild the entire list. We would just update the item that we checked off. So when people talk about React, the term JSX may come up. It's not necessary to use, but it's a really cool JavaScript extension that allows us to combine JavaScript and HTML. So with JavaScript, we can only return data types such as integers and strings, but with JSX, we can return HTML tags like this h1 tag here, which is a header, and it'll translate it to plain JavaScript using React tools. For some people, this may actually be the sole purpose for wanting to use React because it makes things a lot more convenient. So some of the pros with React is that like we said, it's really a lot more fast and efficient since they use virtual DOM. With the use of JSX, it makes writing JavaScript a lot easier and a lot easier to read and understand the code. There's also React Dev Tools, which is a Chrome extension that really helps with debugging. And there's not really many cons with React. It's just the biggest one is that it's only a view layer. So like I said, it's not a framework like a lot of people may call it. It's really just used for making responsive UI. And another con is the learning curve. Since if like you've never used this library before, obviously there's going to be some type of curve, just like with any new library that you're using. So yeah, like I said, there's really not that many cons, especially if you're going into it with the mindset that you're just trying to make a responsive UI for a web app and not expecting a framework. That's it for my presentation. I hope you guys learned a little bit something about React and why a lot of big companies use it for their sites. Thanks.